Take a moment now and introduce yourself in the chat. Before diving into our panel, I'd like to thank our wonderful partners who support these events. Thank you to our 2020 Forum Series sponsors, the College of Arts and Media at CU Denver, the Denver Business Journal, Footers Catering, and the Melvin and Elaine Wolf Foundation. I'd also like to thank 9.Arts for supporting this particular forum. To share a little bit more about the College of Arts and Media, join me in welcoming CBCA board member and executive committee member and dean of the College of Arts and Media, Larry Captain.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is really an exciting event today. Just like Kristen said earlier, that this forum is at the intersection of arts and transportation. Our College of Arts and Media is located right downtown on an area known as the Auraria campus, where we have the skyline of Denver to the east and the mountains of Colorado to the west. And we see ourselves at the intersection of arts, technology, and commerce. So we're very much associated with the creative economy and wanting to boost Denver in many ways and to make sure that our students become national leaders in the creative industries. Our association with CBCA is a wonderful one, and I think it draws attention to the goals of CBCA to advance arts through partnerships with business. And the partnerships that we have are covenants with the city and the students that we have that come from all over the country. And it's just an exciting time. The other thing I'd say about transportation is that's essential for our campus. We have 2 light rail stops on our campus on 2 different sides, and many of our students take that light rail to get to our classes. So we're real conscious of the importance of transportation. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to work with CBCA in many ways, and honored guests, thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Larry. Now I'd like to welcome longtime CBCA member 9.Arts, who has also stepped up to support this particular forum. 9.Arts has been involved in numerous arts projects related to transportation, such as Union Station, Denver International Airport, and numerous hotels in Colorado and nationally, as they are based here in Denver, but they do work in many states all over the country. We'll take a moment now to watch a brief video about 9.Arts and their approach.
The mission of 9.Arts.
The mission of 9.Arts.
The mission of 9.Arts is
to use the power of original art
to transform ordinary spaces into one-of-a-kind experiences.
We listen to clients to really understand the brand story.
We connect your brand, story, and goals to visual ideas and concepts.
Each of our projects are incredibly unique.
All of the work that we do is client-specific and project-specific.
The important first step is to understand our client's vision.
The first step in our process is defining the vision for the art experience.
Defining a project's vision is the most important step to a project's success.
As part of the vision development, we create a project roadmap, and that will include budget, timeline, and art locations.
In order to get the best possible understanding of a space,
we work in collaboration with your partners.
We work closely with architects, interior designers, and contractors to
make sure that the art program is as holistic and integrated as possible.
We then move into research and curating to find the perfect artwork,
keeping in mind all of your goals and your vision for the project.
We work with artists and galleries locally in Denver and all across the country
to find the right artist to bring your vision to life.
Once we have identified your art collection, we move into the art acquisition phase. In our art acquisition phase, we carefully manage the timeline.
We manage your project on time and in budget.
Our art acquisition team brings everything together through the skillful acquisition of the approved art.
Our art acquisition team works every single day to create connections between you and the entire international creative community.
We take care of everything in the project, from framing, shipping and delivery, art handling.
The collaboration between our clients, installers, and artists culminates at the end of the project for a beautiful installation. The end of the project doesn't mean the end of our engagement.
Our team provides marketing materials to our clients, as well as tips on how to tour their art experience.
What better way to tell your brand story than through an engaging art experience?
Thank you, 9.Arts, and all of our forum series sponsors. Now I'd like to invite CBCA Board Chair Chris Ross to share some background about CBCA and this event series.
Thanks, Kristen. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Hopefully you can see me. Thank you, and thanks to all of our sponsors, our guests, and particularly our panelists tonight. And thank you, Larry, as well, one of our board members. I'm Chris Ross with US Bank and CBCA Board Chair this year. It's great to see so many of you here joining us again for these arts and industry forums. CBCA's mission, as I'm sure most of you know, is to advance Colorado's creative economy by connecting arts and business. And we do that through advocacy, research, training, volunteerism, and arts engagement across the state. We are a robust membership organization with 200 member companies from 20 different industries. We also just wrapped up, and I hope you took part in that, a big celebration of our 35th anniversary this year. CBCA launched the Arts and Industry Forum back in 2018 as a way to foster deeper dialogue at the intersection of arts and business. Each of these forums has taken a look at a unique, multifaceted connection between the arts and a specific business industry relevant to Colorado. We invite you to stay connected with CBCA through our website, of course, social media, after this event to learn more about the ways arts and business work together in Colorado and how you and your company can get involved. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a long road to finally present this Arts and Transportation Forum, and we have quite a lineup today. So before we jump in and we turn our virtual mic over to our speakers, each panelist is going to give a brief introduction, about 2 to 3 minutes, and showcase a snippet of their work with some visuals. Then we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Ed Seelover, senior reporter with the Denver Business Journal. Thank you, Ed, for joining us today as moderator. And we have some questions prepared for the panel, but want to hear your thoughts and questions through the chat. So please be sure to engage with us that way. We'll pause around 5:40 for some closing remarks, and then we'll zoom into breakout sessions so you can network and chat with a small group of attendees. And these breakouts will stay open for as long as you'd like so that the conversation can continue. But at this point, I encourage you to go to speaker view on your Zoom platform or select hide non-video participants in your video settings and turn off your camera. That will allow our speakers to be center stage. And we ask that you remain muted as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. You'll be hearing from them now in the following order. First, we have Ben Stone, Director of Arts and Culture with Smart Growth America. Next, Ashley Hairston Doughty, designer and owner of Design Kettle and assistant professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Third, we'll have Marcus Young, who is the artist in residence at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And finally, Colorado's own Alexis Moore, principal planner with the city of Lakewood. And with that, we'll turn it over to you first, Ben.
Great, thanks so much, Kristen. Thanks for using a transportation pun in that intro about the long road. That gets me off the hook from having to do that myself. Hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon. It is evening where I am. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the ancestral lands of the Dakota people. Just want to acknowledge them and try to ground us in the place, at least ground us myself in the place that I am in now. I actually live in Oakland, California. I'm on the road for a bit and have an office in DC. There will not be a quiz later, so no need to remember all of that. I am the Director of Arts and Culture with an organization called Smart Growth America, who again is based in Washington, DC. We work nationally. We have a number of different program areas, including Transportation for America, Locus, a group that works with real estate developers. And as of about 5 years ago, we have an arts and culture team. I should probably pause and say that I often find myself in conversations like this where I am explaining why I've been invited to talk about the topic I'm talking about, because I'm speaking to an arts audience about transportation or speaking to transportation planners and engineers about the arts. So it's especially exciting to be invited to an event that's really about art and transportation. So I can kind of get over the explanation as to why it is we're talking about these two topics today and move on with the actual work. So my organization, or my team within my organization, works in a few different ways, as you see on the screen there. We fund projects, and you'll hear about one of them that Ashley is going to talk about, to create exemplary case studies. We've been working a lot on COVID response these days, but have worked at the intersection of the arts and transportation for a number of years. We track projects around the country to see what's working well. We put together a guide to arts, culture, and transportation in the transportation sector, of course, and have that available on our website, looking at a number of different ways that artists have been contributing to everything from transit projects to construction of projects to community outreach. And then finally, we spend a lot of our energy training artists on what I would call Transportation 101 and transportation professionals on the Arts 101 to get people to come together and work successfully. I should also mention that we have an opportunity right now. You hear from in a minute from Ashley about the work that she's done recently, but we're actually funding a second round of projects open to transit professionals. If any of you represent a transit agency or have a connection to transit agency, I can put a link in the chat in just a moment for more information about that. Next slide. Hopefully this won't break the Zoom with all the animated GIFs running at the same time, but this is from our guide to arts, culture, and transportation, a showcase of a number of the different ways that artists work on transportation projects. And I won't go into all these now, and there's actually many more than what's shown on the screen here. But I hope I can get into these in the conversation. These are really examples that kind of describe the ways that artists and designers, performers, visual artists, any kind of creative professionals have been working on transportation projects. And I think for a lot of people, when they hear art and transportation, they assume we're talking about a mural that might be on a retaining wall or a sculpture outside a bus shelter or a transit stop. And many of the projects that I'm involved in, really at the end of the day, the final project does not look like art. It looks like a well-designed, safe road. It looks like a well-placed transit station. It looks like the kind of transportation system that creates equitable access for all people. And it was a creative process behind the scenes that helped us get there. And hopefully in the conversation, I'll be able to explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. But with that, I will pause and hand it off to the next person.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Hairston Dowdy, and I am an artist and a graphic designer. I also own a design business called Design Kettle, and I'm an assistant professor in graphic design at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So this first group of images is to give you an idea of the work that I do. I recently had an exhibition at the Barrick Museum of Art and Design on the UNLV campus. This exhibition included written pieces that detail my observations as a Black woman in her mid-30s, as well as some older work that's been in response to statements that were said to me, either by those close to me or by complete strangers. In particular, the pillow pieces in the upper left corner, those are all statements that were said to me on or near public transit in Chicago. And some of the statements were nice and innocent, others were derogatory and quite rude. But this project is an example of how I use expressive typography, bold colors, and tactile surfaces to describe my interpretations of different situations. And as you can see with the other images in the exhibition, this is a common aspect of my work. Next slide, please. So recently I had the opportunity to work with Ben and his amazing team of Smart Growth America on a project for the Regional Transit Commission of Southern Nevada, or RTC for short. I helped to design signage that would effectively communicate to the public about the social distancing measures and safe transit riding practices at the local or the main transit hub in the city, Bonneville Transit Center. So I worked in consultation with the RTC staff, and I also had a mentor for the project, Mark Salinas, and helped to create a cohesive concept for the signage. It combines images of well-known locations throughout Las Vegas and also the nearby natural landscapes. These were overlaid with friendly phrases to encourage people to wear their masks and maintain a safe distance from one another. The project also involved surveying people within the community, both people who would ride the public transit and also people who work at the transit center. I also did a series of in-person site visits with the RTC staff and consulted with vinyl specialists to figure out the best places to put the vinyl pieces and things like color and how to make this project a long-lasting success. Thanks.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcus Young. Yang Mo is my Chinese name. I'm joining you from Minnesota, also, like Ben is. And like Ben said, this is the homeland of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. I am the artist in residence for the Department of Transportation, and hopefully even that title strikes you as strange and fascinating, like it strikes me. We can talk about what that means, but thanks to Ben and others who are creating the space and sustaining the space for this unique collaboration, this bringing together of very different things. I think that there is a great potential to reveal the hidden art that is everywhere. That is one of my main missions in life, is to demonstrate that art actually is in all of us and all around us. Yet without a more awakened presence, we usually don't see it. And if our conversation gets to that point, I'd love to show you how art can even be found in the very unassuming and modest stop sign post. But for our purposes now, I'd like to show you the next slide, which is a very unattractive and standard issue, literally beige conference room on the top floor of MnDOT, Minnesota Department of Transportation. This is conference room 820, a much neglected, unbeloved room. It even has like the 1980s posters. You can't see it from this angle. Those posters that say inspiration, courage, those kinds of things that are still hanging probably from the 80s. And I wanted to ask for this room and ask the permission and the support and the encouragement to transform this room into something very different. So if we can show the next slide, please. It will become the Land Acknowledgement Confluence Room. It will be a place and a placeholder for asking, what is land acknowledgement? Why do we need land acknowledgement? How do we practice better land acknowledgement? It is a temporary redesign of a conference room, and it is to help us ground in a better understanding of who we are that is much more inclusive. I know that by practicing land acknowledgement, I can be in the room, in a gathering, and here on this land in a much more positive and fully present way. So this room is to help MnDOT staff, but hopefully beyond that, to try a cultural shift, a deep cultural shift. And with that, I'd like to show you maybe one or two more slides. So this is a conceptual rendering of what the room will eventually look like. I'm in the middle of installing it right now. And it will invite sort of your whole presence, your whole body, your whole self. It will invite us to gather differently. And it will have a constant presence of what is a more inclusive definition of land as we do our work together. And the very last slide is a quote by someone from MnDOT when we were talking about land and land acknowledgement. Sorry, the formatting didn't translate very well, but I'll just read the quote to you. This is from a land surveyor. So people are going to have a hard time getting a grip on this. I'm a land surveyor. We took land and turned it into property. It was never property before that. It was all for the purpose of generating revenue for the government. It's not just land acknowledgement. The Columbus statue coming down is going to get people thinking. There's a lot of stuff popping wide open. It's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. It's a move in the right direction. So thank you, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
Hi there. Thanks for hosting this event today, CBCA, and thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alexis Moore. I'm a planner with the City of Lakewood, and I'm excited to share our arts and transportation story with you. It really focuses on the W Line light rail, which for those of you in the Denver area know, it starts downtown Denver and extends west through Lakewood to Golden. And particularly, we're focusing on the Lamar Station, which is a neighborhood walk-up station in Northeast Lakewood. The W Line opened in 2013, and as we were planning for that opening, we worked closely with the communities along the entire line, but also especially where the stations were to be located. The Lamar Station is located in an area that has a lot of former industrial and agricultural land uses, and has a lot of missing links and transportation connections to access the transit station, which didn't even actually have a sidewalk leading to it when it opened. We had an opportunity to work with the community through an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, brownfields grant for the area to envision what it could become. And we heard a lot about the desire to create an arts district in the area. It's just a couple blocks from the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design campus, which is on the National Historic Register. Of course, historic West Colfax, a major transportation corridor through the area. That planning effort resulted in the creation of a 40 West Urban Design and Mobility Plan and launched a grassroots effort to create the nonprofit 40 West Arts District, which is now a state certified creative district, one of the first in Colorado. That plan also launched a really big idea, as you can see on this map, with the green line, to create an arts trail to connect the Lamar Station to the 3 parks in the Arts District and to neighborhood serving businesses, schools, restaurant shops, galleries, and other amenities. This area of Lakewood is underserved by parks and open spaces compared to more affluent, newer areas of the city. And the community really wanted to activate those spaces and create vibrant, beautiful environments where they could feel safe and comfortable getting out and recreating and enjoying their neighborhood and connecting to those transit amenities that were being created. In 2016, we applied for and received a major grant from the National Endowment for the Arts through their Our Town grant program to create what is now known as the 40 West Art Line. And you can see in the images as well as on the map, it's literally a green painted line on the ground that's 4 miles long and connects all of these amenities. We hired artists as problem solvers to work with the community to address a lot of the needs and challenges that the community brought forward through these processes in terms of improving the connections, activating the parks, and had contracts with over 24 artists who worked in turn with hundreds of community members to create this amenity that launched in June of 2018 with over 4,000 people at a celebratory block party. Next slide, please. And these are just a few images showcasing some of the over 70 public art, both temporary and permanent installations that you can see along the art line, addressing some of those community needs and really vibrant, colorful, beautiful pieces that the community in many cases participated in actually working with the artists to create enhancing blighted, unsightly fences with art installations that provide an uplifting, positive message, bringing attention to some of the mobility and transportation challenges with crossing at major intersections and beautifying those spaces through art. And also, if we get a chance to talk about this afternoon, I just want to point out that, while this project is really rooted in transportation and through the lens of working with artists in the community, it has really opened up and become a platform for new relationships and opportunities that we never really envisioned could be possible before. One of the photos here shows a woman who lives on the art line in a lower income senior housing development. And obviously during this past 9 or 10 months and living through COVID, the seniors living here have been very socially isolated. And we applied for a grant from AARP, which has funded artists in the 40 West Arts District to bring joy to these residents and to work with them through art projects that they can do at home, paint by number art kits, and share their message of living through the pandemic. And this particular installation was recently installed on a fence right outside of their housing community on a major sidewalk that leads to shopping and transit. So if you go out there today, you'll see many of the seniors that participate in the project getting out and enjoying it and having that opportunity to engage in a unique way because of this art line experience that's in their neighborhood. So I think that's all. I look forward to chatting.
Doesn't look like I can turn my video back on, so I'll just talk. First, thank you, Alexis. I have certainly a soft spot for the art line, and I believe very recently our leadership arts class, you were able to give our class a tour, and it's just such a wonderful project that has brought new life to that entire area of Lakewood. So thank you for joining us. Also, thank you to Ben and Ashley and Marcus as well for your introductions. I think already I'm really excited to dive in and hear more. So with that, I would like to introduce Ed Seelover with the Denver Business Journal, who will be moderating our panel today. Remember to stay muted, use the chat for questions and comments, and Ed, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Well, Kristen, thanks so much for having me here today. And thanks to all the panelists for what I'm hoping is going to be a really revelatory talk for people. I will admit, when I was approached to moderate this, I said, I cover transportation and I haven't put a lot of thought into arts and transportation and the intersection of that. And I think just from what we've started to see in your presentations, I think you can open some eyes as to how the two go together. But now that we know a little bit about what you're doing, I want to start with a question I think a lot of people who are listening here, and a lot of people who may not be listening may be asking, and that is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? I think each of these has a purpose beyond just the idea of imbuing transportation and arts together. Can you talk about the problem that you saw that you believe your work is really trying to solve, the thing you're really trying to improve by kind of coalescing these two? And maybe we'll start with Ben, because it seems like, Ben, you have kind of the most widespread view on all the problems that can be solved here, and then talk about your 3 specific projects and what you're looking to do specifically. But Ben, what kind of problems can we solve by using art when we think about transportation?
If anything, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that there are many, many problems to solve. So there's a long list of problems to solve. I'd say the animated GIFs I had in my slide, those are essentially, or could be described as quote unquote problems. Much of my work is about trying to sell the idea of working with an artist to the transportation sector, which is not always a very straightforward pitch. And so I found that generally, if I understand where the challenges are, where the problems are, what the pain points are for transportation folks, as I often describe it, what keeps people up at night when they go home from work, and then explain how artists can help with those challenges. That's sort of the most effective way, I think. But I'd say big picture thinking, in the transportation world, there's of course, domination by civil engineers for the most part, and planners as well. And there's a real technical approach to problems, which makes total sense. If you're going to design a bridge, you better have a good engineer who understands, all the different issues you need to put in place, materials and all kinds of engineering things so the bridge doesn't collapse, of course. And many of our challenges and problems as it relates to moving from point A to point B and moving things and people from point A to point B have been solved in that way. And yet we still have lots of problems. We're still building roads even today that are bulldozing primarily communities of color. We're still adding lanes to highway, which are adding to carbon emissions instead of adding rail and other kinds of ways of moving around. We have all the technical solutions to things, but we're using them in the wrong way. And we're also in many cases using the same solutions in every kind of place. And every place is different, every neighborhood is different. And so a lot of the challenge that I am trying to work with artists to address is the fact there's really a qualitative and a cultural side of these challenges. There's a technical side and understanding, how to add the numbers correctly and work out with the materials correctly. But unless we're actually selling these projects and working with people and building support from people, making sure people understand what the benefit of doing work in a positive way really is for them, it's going to be a huge problem. And I mean, maybe one of the more obvious examples of that in at least modern days is the what's known as the bike lash, the pushback against bike lanes in many communities. Bike lanes are often seen as a sign of gentrification, and there's a whole long history of that. And there's a whole unfortunate history as to where amenities actually go and what drives the improvements that public agencies bring to one neighborhood versus another. But a big part of the issue is just that the people pushing in the advocacy community, the people pushing and designing and planning these kinds of lanes or new kinds of improvements are generally white. They're not always representative of the people in the communities they're working in. I feel like artists are really culture bearers in many cases. They're good translators. They're good liaisons between communities to help understand what a concern of a community might be and what the technical approach to solving a problem might actually be as well. So it's really about translation. It's about interpreting different projects. They're not the same everywhere and getting community buy-in as a result through that.
Thank you. And Ashley, let me go to you. Now, you kind of illustrated in yours a very specific problem you're looking to solve, the idea of, hey, how do we keep people safe on the RTC trains, RTC buses during this pandemic? But go a little beyond that. I mean, in the way that you looked at it, how could you solve that problem with what you're doing in ways that a straight up engineer who may not be thinking with a more artistic mindset could have solved that?
Well, a big part of my process was actually doing research into existing methods of keeping people aware of the COVID-19 health advisories, notices, and things that people should be doing to keep one another safe. And quite a bit of the signage in the United States and also in other countries is it's not as interesting to look at, and it's inundated with negative wording, avoid, stay away. And we already are well aware that we're in a pandemic, it's scary. And I got the sense that people don't necessarily want to be reminded of that, especially when they're having to come to the bus station every day to go to work, to go see their families. So as a visual designer, and with my experience in taking verbal messages and trying to translate them into visual messages, I felt that it was important to make pieces that were visually appealing so people would actually want to look at them, and to also find ways to state the different rules that people should follow to keep one another safe, wearing a mask and staying 6 feet apart from one another, saying those in a way that was more approachable and sounded less like a command. So I did surveys with friends and people who follow me on Instagram, and also the RTC put together some surveys on Twitter and their social media to get some feedback about how people would just talk to their friends about, wearing a mask. Where is your mask? What are you, why are you sneezing without covering your mouth? Things like that. So by finding out the everyday way people talk to one another. I was able to take some of those phrases and use those and just have more of a conversational tone to the messages.
I'm curious, just as a follow-up here, what kind of results have you found? And I know that's a very hard thing to measure, but has there been any evidence that maybe these work better than the no, 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 don't get within 6 feet of other people signs?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any hard data, but from what I've been told by the team I worked with at the RTC, people are taking notice. One really interesting thing that's been happening is people are actually taking selfies with with the artwork. The last time I visited the transit station, in the plaza area where there's actually vinyl pieces on the concrete and people tend to sit and wait for the buses, it could definitely tell people were trying to stay 6 feet away from one another. Everybody I saw was wearing a mask. So I do feel good that the messages I helped to put together are working.
Excellent. Well, Marcus, let me turn to you now. And you talked a little bit about one specific project with the conference room, but as a whole, in your position as artist in residence from MnDOT, what do you view the problems you're trying to solve as? And by that, I mean, what kind of ways can you make differences with a unique approach that you're taking?
Thanks, Ed. I was invited in part to help shift culture at MnDOT, and I'll expound a little bit on what Ben said. And I would like to share with you some sort of paraphrased quotes from MnDOT staff people that I heard from. So one is that we are bound by technical processes, right? We are bound by technical processes. We have technical solutions for crises of the spirit. So this is one line of thinking and why people might be looking for new ways to do things. Here's another quote. We spend a lot of resources being predictable. So I interpret that being, yes, we need to be reliable, but reliability gone too far is predictability to the point of not seeing innovation and opportunities. Another quote is, we are part of the community. We are not just a road going through it. And I hear in that quote sort of the longing to not just be the sort of adversary, but to be much more perceived as much more integrated into everyday life. That the MnDOT is not an obstacle, but should really be a partner to improve livability. And finally, this one really struck me. We build roads, we know numbers and facts, we don't know what to do with our emotions. MnDOT is not the only agency with this problem. I wonder if that's where art fits in. So I think unless we are have training and practices to be to acknowledge that we are technical, intellectual, mental people, but we also have deeply spiritual, emotional sides to ourselves. Unless we sort of understand how all of that works together, we're not going to be able to deliver and present ourselves and be with the community in ways that you can hear from the quotes that even MnDOT staff people really want to be with their community. And like the quote that I read in my slides, the surveyor, he said, he's like, the Columbus statue has fallen. This is the time we need to really accelerate our thinking. How are we going to live together? What is inclusive? What is equity? What is welcoming? What is the future that allows all of us to live in a reimagined world? So this is just an opportunity with artists to come in, to open pathways, to be very different together, and hopefully to encourage all of us to tap into our whole selves and all of our creativity.
Now I'm going to follow up kind of like I did with Ashley and ask you, have you either seen examples of where this has made a difference in MnDOT planning and execution, or is there a goal you have that you'd like to walk away from this and say, okay, that's what proves that this got people thinking differently?
I can give you two small examples that may, with more attention and care, open up into other things. So as I do my presentations to introduce myself, because obviously you stick an artist in a 5,000 person, engineering kind of entity, people like very friendly, they'll say, who are you and what are you here for and what do you hope to do in 1 year and have you started and have you finished? So I try to get myself in front of a lot of people, and at one of my presentations, someone got the idea that I practice mindful breathing and invited me to join a group of women leaders in transportation, sort of a subgroup of a employees resource group, and said, could you just take 10 minutes in our agenda to help us practice mindful breathing? So I did that, and I think you can just, by inserting something so simple, the art of breathing that we all, as human beings, somehow we've forgotten, that the benefit was palpable and immediate. People enjoyed themselves more, they were present, they were open to each other. And as I was saying to Ben earlier today, as we're doing sort of deep reflection on the year, I could see spinning a project, a year of breathing, of helping MnDOT breathe better. How would that work? So I think it takes an artist, but not just artists, to help imagine that and create that as a real thing. Now, the second tiny example I'll give you is, again, from a presentation. Someone came to me and said, it sounds like you're interested in healing. I have a project where 2 young girls were hit on the highway. They were pedestrians and they're hit on the highway. And this small town is obviously traumatized, and they want what they think will fix the problem. And what we think will fix the problem won't actually fix the problem, but they want it so badly because they're hurting so badly that that's what they want and they won't take anything else. So is there anything you can do to help us converse and be together in a more healing way? And that invitation for me to help never got anywhere because the small town community was in such tight and closed ways that they did not want to extend any more conversation. So, but the possibility is there that if MnDOT is reaching out, that the staff is reaching out, that we need more tools and more practices on how to have these conversations. I hope that's just a glimmer into the possibility of what can come with more time and more familiarity around art, this type of art and transportation.
Well, great. And Alexis, let me turn to you to kind of finish this round of question and say, what about you? I mean, I'm familiar with the work of the trail. What was the problem? What were you looking to do with this?
Yeah, it's a really complex question, I think, in our case. I think we were trying to do a lot. And I mentioned that the Art Line came out of the process of planning for the Lamar Station and the W Line light rail, and the history of that project is, it's a very long, painful project for the community. It, resulted in removing many mature trees and kind of going right through the heart of our oldest neighborhood in the city. And there was a lot of pain and frustration, and rightfully so, I think. And I think that the process to work with the community to discuss the creation of the 40 West Arts District and the Art Line itself really, I think, gave people the position to feel like they were actually making more of the decisions for their community, and in a really, really positive way. In one of the early community meetings about creating the 40 West Arts District, It was a packed room of people, and one of the property owners who lived right next to the Lamar Station stood up at one point in the meeting and said, "Is this just another thing being shoved down our throats?" And I think, they were just so used to the fact that the transportation department had made the decision that this is where the light rail was going to go, and the community was just going to have to deal with whatever impacts came from it. And a woman in the audience stood up and said, "I'm an artist and I live in this neighborhood and I couldn't be more excited to see an arts district being created here." And literally every single person in the room stood up except for the original person who was right next to the station and clapped. And it was just this shift you could tell in feeling like, of course not everybody was getting what they wanted, but I think that the community felt like for the first time, maybe they actually had a say in what was happening and that they got to be a part of creating this arts district and the vision for it. And so I think it was, trying to check that box of giving the community more buy-in and ownership of what was happening in their neighborhood, and literally letting them get their hands dirty and work with the amazing creative individuals and artists that came to the table to help facilitate the next steps in that process. I mentioned the park situation and the fact that the parks are not very easily accessed and safely accessed with infrastructure. As a pedestrian or bicyclist, there's a lot of dark areas, and we really wanted to make sure that people in this part of Lakewood had the same opportunities to walk down the street and feel safe going to their park as people in newer, more suburban areas of Lakewood. And I think we really have been trying to look at this built environment that we have and these underutilized and underloved urban spaces and trying to transform them. We're not going to be able to create more parkland in the area, but we can do a lot better with what we have and creating those connections. And I'd also add, I think we haven't really touched on the economic development piece of it and supporting the creative individuals who lived in the neighborhood when the district was created, and many artists and creatives who have been pushed out of other areas of the Denver metro area due to affordability issues, and have been, I think, really embraced on West Colfax and with the 40 West Arts District, in large part because of not only the nonprofit, but we have a wonderful partner with our Lakewood West Colfax Business Improvement District, and trying to find a home for the creative community and give them opportunities to live and work and create art where they are. And that was another goal of the art line as well, and really supporting the local artist community economically.
Excellent. Well, thanks. Well, I want to open this next question up to everyone. Not everyone has to answer here, but I'm curious. I mean, I think you're probably speaking to people who are interested in this crossover of arts and transportation, but have you run into obstacles and how do you get around them? I think Alexis gave us a little bit of an example there. What other obstacles have you found in kind of trying to push this coalescence? And could you give us an example of how you get around it so people who are listening in know how they could utilize it in the same way? And anybody can start here.
I'll jump in if no one else will. Why not?
Thanks, man.
Sure thing. So I run into obstacles all the time. I think probably anyone working in this intersection or the intersection of art in any other field runs into obstacles. It's a fairly niche operation. I think just in the last round of questions and hearing, what have you accomplished with this? And you probably everyone heard from folks who basically said, this hasn't been happening very long. It's hard to know what we're going to accomplish in the long run because there hasn't been a lot of this kind of intersectional work. And so some of the reasons for that are that transportation generally works on precedent. So if you're pitching a new idea, you have to prove that that idea worked before. And if that idea hasn't been tried before, it's really hard to show a successful example that happened before. So it's just one of those hard things to get the ball rolling, which is something that I and everyone else in this call is working on right now. So hopefully it'll continue to get easier. For me, I find that a lot of times it's about repositioning what it is I'm trying to do. A lot of, I think what you're getting at is talking to agency staff, people within local municipal government or state government, convincing them they should work with artists. But there are communities who are self-organizing, who have artists in them, who are doing great things, sometimes with permission, oftentimes without permission. And they're essentially doing the kind of work that many local governments want to do themselves. They're painting crosswalks, they're creating events in the street, they're building additions to bus shelters or bus benches to create shelters. They're doing a lot of this stuff just on their own and organizing on their own. And 9 times out of 10, when I find that kind of organizing happening, it's either led by an artist or an artist is heavily involved in that kind of work. And so when I then talk to somebody who works for an agency who says, you know, we're doing a complete streets project, we're trying to decrease pedestrian involved crashes in this corridor, I can point them to the people who are already self-organized, usually with an artist in the lead who are working in that general direction, and say, you know, there's a team of people already working on that. If you all collaborated together, you'd be able to achieve a lot more.
Marcus or Ashley, do you want to kind of weigh in on this too? Ways that you've gotten around things, and I call them because I know Alexis, you kind of gave that example. But
I can try to jump in here a little bit. Similar to what Ben is saying, like when working in art and transportation, it seems like what isn't an obstacle. At the same time, when given the right space and cultivating, you know, conversations like this, but partnerships that can sustain that space for creativity. Really, once you're in there and there's a home that you're invited into and that you can look around and say, oh, okay, I can be my creative self in this space, then obstacles tend to be just your own imagination and perception. So I don't know if Meredith has, you have your fingertips on some of the images that extra images that I sent you. I'd love to use a couple of those images to demonstrate this idea of obstacle. And if you can go to the, maybe it's the second one. Yeah, the second one, I think. Thanks, Meredith, for being, I didn't give you much heads up here. So, you know, we might all know about sidewalk maintenance. This is from my days when I was the city artist in St. Paul. I was housed in Public Works for 9 years as a kind of a part-time contracted anomalous being. And, you know, I wanted to tackle a system that was quite modest. And this is a $1 million sidewalk repair system, an annual program that fixes broken sidewalk. And so I just kind of looked at their process and said, well, can we turn this space, this surface, into an expressive space, into a place where we can print poetry? So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see, you know, what looks simple, like a stamp that is going to be, you know, it's the universal stick your finger in wet concrete and write I was here or something, but here it's more sanctioned and more poetic. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Meredith. This is the type of work I was proposing. Like, can we turn this space over to our local residents, our people who live in the city, and express what they want to express? And here the poem says, a little less war, a little more peace, a little less poor, a little more eats. And then the next slide. You know, when I encountered this, when I first pitched this idea, the first question was, maybe this is an obstacle, is it going to be a trip hazard? You know, here I was talking about turning the city into a book of poetry, that all of its sidewalk can become surfaces for writing and publishing poetry. And then the engineering mind was very concerned for people's health, as it should be, and said, well, is it going to cause anyone to trip? And so we had to marry the concerns of the technical and the aspirations of the poetic or the creative. And here you see in 2014, after 6 years of doing the program, every blue dot is an installation of poetry in St. Paul. And that's 2014, so this is 6 years ago now. And you can see how once you've changed a system, what I would call a behavior, I'm a behavioral artist, but this is a city behavior. It, you know, just like we have to brush our teeth in the morning, well, every year it fixes its sidewalk. So I just adjusted a small 1 degree adjustment of their established system of fixing sidewalks. And now it includes publishing poetry. So what solution does this really solve? Well, I would say that it was a solution in search of a problem, I suppose. No one said, hey, we don't have enough poetry on our sidewalks in St. Paul. So sometimes when you invite an artist, you get something very unexpected. But if I'm able to change a system and I'm able to work with the engineers who aren't necessarily obstacles, who bring their own concerns, and I'm able to work with them, then you can really make a big shift in how you see the world. And there's just a couple more slides to show this. So the next one, I mentioned the humble stop sign post. So there in the white t-shirt is Lisa Elias, a sculptor. And we worked together to say, how can we change this unattractive, modest, unassuming object, the stop sign post, into something artistic. And then the next slide is just maybe a detail of it. Yeah, so you can see, and I don't think I have another slide that shows, do I, Meredith, like the impact if you start, oh yeah, here we go. These are all the stop signs in the city of St. Paul. So once you think systemically, and maybe here the obstacle was, again, the engineer who said, well, you can't change the post because we've as a discipline, we've looked into what the post needs to be in order to break away and to be safe if something crashes into it, so you can't change it. So again, it was just like thinking creatively, just let's open up the space for possibility before we say no. And I happen to live in the Twin Cities where there's a lot of open-mindedness and a lot of friendliness. So the weird artist who comes in with weird ideas, they'll listen, they will give me some time, and then we can work things out. And so hopefully you can see how initial obstacles become the friction that you do need for creativity. So I'll pass it back to you, Ed, or maybe to Ashley.
Well, actually, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this, but I'll put this out there, and you can either start this or others can jump in too. When we talk about obstacles, I think we are at a unique time here, especially in working with public infrastructure, of reduced budgets, of people saying, okay, this might have been a great idea during the boom times, but frankly, we're getting no tax revenue in a time of pandemic. We've got to cut things back. What's been the effect of the last 8 months in some of these efforts that you all have had, and how do you overcome those obstacles? And again, either Ashley or Alexis, if you have specific obstacles you want to talk about, great. But in general, I want to talk about that too. How do you deal with this in a time of reduced budgets, these projects?
I imagine Ben could probably speak a bit more about the budget aspects, but I do know as an artist that was asked to be a part of this art and transit rapid response project. It was a great way for these public transportation agencies to implement projects like this that they might not otherwise be able to do. There was a budget that I had to work within, and one thing that I struggled with at the very beginning was just trying to figure out what to do. The images of the transit station, it doesn't even show the full scale of the location. There's so many places where signage could go that I wanted to put signage everywhere. But in order to fit into the budget, I really had to talk to the people at the RTC, look at where people entered and left the buses, places where people congregated the most, and choose locations that made the most sense. So initially there was a lot of talk about putting vinyl signage on the building itself, but in reality, people would get off the buses, walk off the main pathway where these benches are, and then walk towards the building, and there's all these opportunities for signage to be placed just leading towards the building. So I was more selective about putting certain signage in the walkway areas and on the walls leading towards the building. And then there's a plaza area, like I mentioned, where people would sit and rest and just wait for the next bus to arrive. And so that was another really good opportunity to have signage. And so since there was just one big wall at the plaza, I put one big sign there, and that tended to be the one that people go and take selfies with. And then in the plaza itself, we used the concrete as a way to post messages. And what ended up being really neat about that was there are these rectangular slats. I don't know the proper term for it, but the concrete pieces, those are actually 6 feet wide. So being able to put signage into those areas was a good way to illustrate to people, this is how far apart you need to be from one another. So it took a little bit of time to get there, but it truly meant, visiting the bus station and talking to the people at the RTC about people's habits. As Marcus mentioned, even like trip hazards and things like that, making sure that the material selected would have longevity and wouldn't pose any risks to people. Those are all things that came through a lot of collaboration and talking to one another.
Ben, I know you may want to weigh in here, but Alexis, I want to throw this one specifically to you because as a principal planner, I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of issues with city reduced budgets. I mean, how do you deal with kind of the goals of what you want to do, both with the art trail and with future projects and incorporation of artistic ideas at a time of reduced revenues?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of our big challenges too is that the art line is, it's this unique animal of kind of this partnership between the city and the BID and the 40 West Arts District, and nobody, we all try to pool our resources together to make it work, which is great, and that we have these partnerships, but it's also challenging in that all of us are impacted right now financially, of course. I think the partnership is key and continuing to expand those partnerships. And just this summer, we worked with the city of Edgewater to paint the green line to connect to the new library to, bring that amenity into the system as well. And Edgewater contributed to the project. And also we were able to help connect them with an emerging artist who we're trying to, help mentor to do some ground mural painting. And so it's sort of a win-win that she was able to get some unique experience and was able to be paid for her work. And Edgewater was able to get a temporary game ground mural as well. So that was wonderful. I think a question just came up in the chat about this and along those lines in terms of the paint that has been used and without having an ongoing line item budget for the art line, we do have some small budget for maintenance that we've kind of been squirreling away and using very strategically. And one creative way that we're dealing with our limited budget and the community's desire for the art line to be dynamic and evolving and to continue to support our creative community financially is, instead of using our limited maintenance budget to go in and power wash off the murals that aren't looking up as well as they could after a couple of years, we hired this summer an artist out of Denver, Julio Mendoza, who painted 3 new ground murals on top of 3 that had been kind of chipping away and fading. And so it was a real win-win in that we were able to support a local artist and bring amazingly beautiful new ground murals to the art line and address our maintenance challenge there. So trying to kind of be creative, I guess, is what I would say.
And speaking of creative, again, I'm going to open this up to everyone, but I want to throw a curve into this and say, these are the practicalities that we've been dealing with here. How do you overcome obstacles? How do you deal with reduced budgets? I want you all to dream big. I mean, if you could, where do you take this intersection of art and transportation? What are the kind of things that, I don't want to use the term unlimited budget because that's unrealistic, but given the chance, what could really be done that people aren't thinking about right now? Give me a moonshot idea about art and transportation and explain how it can change the way we move around. And again, anyone can start here. You
can go first in this one again, too.
Yeah, I was going to call on you if you didn't jump in, Ben, so go ahead.
I'm trying to be polite and let other people go, but I'll keep things going. I'll answer the last question really quickly, too, because I think it's an important question, and it is, the real nuts and bolts of doing this work is actually finding the money to do it. So really quickly, I think Marcus is a testament to the fact that in the case of at least MnDOT, in a time when budgets are really tough. I don't know exactly what MnDOT's overall budget is, but I know every state DOT, every public agency period in the country is struggling right now for all kinds of obvious reasons. They've actually doubled down and have funded his position again for another year. And that's partially a testament to Marcus and the work that he's done. I'm sure if he had a bomb the first year, maybe they wouldn't have done that. But since it did go so well, even despite budget constraints, they are still moving forward. And it kind of points to maybe a larger issue, which is that when I started working with two state DOTs, Minnesota and Washington State, which also has had artists in residence, I was told by somebody, and I forget who, just how expensive it is to have staff leave and have to train new staff members. If you have somebody who's in the bridge division and they know the ins and outs of every single bridge across the state of Washington, and they have tons of knowledge stored inside their brain, when they leave, they might write down some of it, but they're going to take a lot of that knowledge with them. And then takes a few years at least to get someone else up to speed, and that costs money, of course. So if you can create, as Marcus is doing, and as the artists in Washington did, create a culture where people actually want to come to work. And I know this is not the entire focus of the artist residencies, but some of these residencies did point to this kind of work. If you can create an environment where people want to come to work and want to stay there and work on staff retention, that actually helps save money in the long run. And then there's, if you think holistically about the transportation world, economic development, housing, all these things are all related. And the state of Massachusetts, Ashley just talked about the work that we did with her, but the state of Massachusetts is doing something very similar, kind of times 100 or maybe even times more than that. They have a $10 million initiative where the state DOT is funding different municipalities to hire artists and designers to work on issues related to COVID and transportation. And this is at a time when, of course, they're struggling as well. $10 million is a huge amount of money. And they recognize that if they don't do something to help restaurants stay open, to help people be able to move around safely, then they're going to suffer more. It's sort of like one of those issues where they can't afford not to spend $10 million on these kinds of issues. And the alternative would be much more expensive. So I think it's pretty crucial to think creatively at this moment, even with limited budgets. The other question, the moonshot question, I know other folks have lots of ideas about that. I was just talking to Marcus a little bit about that actually earlier today, so I'll let him go in just a second. But for me, I've often wished and hoped that there would be some energy from the world of artists in focusing on new forms of mobility. I think right now we as a society have left it up to Silicon Valley and some large corporations to think about autonomous vehicles, think way into the future about pods and hyperloops and things that really are being created by very disconnected people who live in environments that are not very normal for the vast majority of people. They are very sci-fi in the way that they think. They are definitely focused on returning investments to investors, which of course at the end of the day is really important. But in this kind of visioning and thinking big about what the future might look like, I really worry about leaving all of that futurist kind of thinking up to the people who are concerned about their own bottom line and not leaving it to some more creative people who have maybe their heads a little bit below the clouds as well.
All right, other moonshots. There we go, Marcus.
I'll jump in here. So, I really came to transportation just, of course I walk, I bike, I drive, I ride public transportation, but I'm just a normal user. I'm not an expert. And so to step into an agency where basically everyone has their expertise and I'm the beginner, the neophyte. So I got to ask really basic questions. So I had a conversation with the director of, the office director of land management. And I said, can you just break it down to a lay person? What is all this for? What do you aspire to? Just break it down to a lay person's kind of language. And I was really shocked by what he said. He said, when we're at our best, we're really about the freedom of movement. And I just never thought of it that way. He said, yes, we want you to get to your relatives. We want you to get to the corner store. We want you to be able to move for moving's sake so you don't feel stuck and trapped. And we want you to be able to do that safely, accessibly, and affordably. So it's about your freedom of movement at its best. And then, a few conversations later, someone said, well, I was just teasing the idea of renaming the department, but someone said, it was not always called the Department of Transportation, it was called Department of Highways. So, then more recently it's been called the Department of Transportation, but maybe it actually should be called the Department of Freedom of Movement. So that's one of my moonshots. If we really want to embrace what your best self, give yourself that name of your best self. You are the Department of Freedom of Movement. All right, so that's the first moonshot. So this is the second, maybe this is a Venus shot or a Mars shot, but it's like it's something I learned from my time at the city. You know, since I'm an artist in residence right now, and artists in residence are thought of as single, anomalous entities floating in a big bureaucracy trying to find itself. But why do we think of artists in residence that way? Why don't we think of them as multiples? Why don't we think of them as long-term as opposed to either just project specific or yearly based, and rotate them out and get the next one in, at best. And when I pointed out that, well, at the city, the city of St. Paul, I think you have like 200 inspectors. So if you have a department of 200 or more inspectors, we can certainly dream up of 200 artists that can sit at the table along with the engineers and the planners and the maintenance workers and the, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just find a way to, that's my Mars shot. Let's just find a way to imagine the role of the artist, not as the project specific person or the 1 year specific person, but that we are not single entity anomalous beings that just come in and out and sort of fill a space that's predetermined for us. Let us be at the table to help you think and imagine and execute the daily work of keeping all of us alive.
Excellent. Alexis or Ashley, any last thoughts on maybe a Jupiter shot?
I'm going to let the artists do those big creative thinking. I love it. I love everything you guys just said. I think it's great.
All right, you're in the spotlight, Ashley.
I was just going to mention, I guess something similar to what Ben and Marcus both alluded to is, thinking more about the specific project I worked on, I really hope that this is something that the RTC will be able to maintain and maybe even have other artists come in and do similar work, because I'm just imagining that station now without anything there, even after, we have a vaccine and COVID is under control. I wouldn't want to see it go back to how it was before. I feel like it needs to have something visual there, especially because Las Vegas is such a vibrant, interesting city. So, I don't know if it's a Jupiter shot or a moon shot, but it would be really nice to see this kind of be a continuous thing for the RTC in Las Vegas.
Great. And I got one last question, then I'm going to step aside here. And this question comes actually not from me, but from an audience member. And this is a little more in the practical range. Audience member writes, with a lot of these projects seem to hinge on a champion or the key individual for a project or program. So how can other agencies or departments get started with the organization, whether it be safety, legal, sustainability? How do just, agencies without one specific champion get involved, or how do you find that champion to talk about funding aspects of art and transportation?
Well, you definitely need a champion, and you need some partners, and you need a funder or more, or two, or a funding mechanism. And you need to build a lot of trust. I think you have the people there, but you need deep trust, because you're embarking on something that everyone delights in, I think, but is also risky and a lot of unknowns. So where do you go for trust, and where do you go to build enough partnerships and relationships so that the space can be kept open for this work? So definitely it starts with a champion. Every instance I've seen always has a big time champion, and then from that person, or maybe, if you're lucky, more than one, you build out the relationships and the partnerships with the funders, with nonprofits, with experts like Ben represents and others here at this gathering. But definitely vision by a champion. Starts there.
Yeah, and I would just add, I totally agree with all of that, Marcus. And I think, Ben, it looks like you put in the chat, responding to that question, that partnering with a local arts nonprofit or organization is a great way to help get something going. And I would totally echo that. I work for bureaucracy. I have, I'm a planner in a local government, but I think there's no way we could have done something like the Art Line without having 40 West Arts as our super strong community partner, and building that trust, building those relationships, but also I think they're able to get things done in ways that even those of us in the city who are huge supporters of all of this work and trying to make it happen just can't do without that partnership. So.
Great. Well, thank you all. This is where I'm going to jump in and turn it back to Kristen, because I know there was some opportunities here to have some breakout rooms. But thank you all for the discussion. For me, this has been enlightening to hear about the push behind this, what it can lead to, and why we need to keep thinking about this. And I hope everyone in the audience has gotten those same feelings. So, Kristen, thank you for letting us do this, and I'll let you take this back now.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed, for moderating and leading this discussion today. It certainly has been very inspiring and thought-provoking, I think, for all of us, and made us think about arts and transportation in this intersection in a very different way. And you all do very exciting work. So really just want to, again, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ben, Ashley, Marcus, and Alexis for taking the time with us this evening. But we're going to keep the conversation going, and we're going to break out into some small groups so that you can share your reactions and comments and have some more conversation. I do want to again, say thank you to our sponsors. If you can join me and show some love to CBCA's 2020 Forum Series sponsors, the College of Arts and Media at CU Denver, the Denver Business Journal. Again, thank you, Ed, for that ongoing partnership with the DBJ, Footers Catering, and the Melvin and Elaine Wolf Foundation, and a special shout out tonight to 9.arts for supporting this particular forum. I hope you will all stay connected to CBCA. We've been offering a lot of webinars I was told to use the word swivel now instead of pivot, as we've swiveled to a lot more virtual online events. And so please check us out. We have some really great webinars and events coming up about Colorado's creative economy, especially during this challenging time. CBCA also was involved just this week working with some of our cultural partners in launching a new public awareness campaign in partnership with local government, cultural and business leaders, which is the next phase of our Arts Through It All holidays campaign. And we're encouraging people to give gifts of art from the heart this holiday season. And you can give directly to cultural organizations or relief funds. You can gift an arts membership, subscription, or class, and you can shop local and support our artists. So visit artsthroughitall.org to learn more. And in a moment, you are going to be zoomed into your breakout room, and you're welcome to hang out and grab a glass of wine, chat as long as you like. And again, thank you all so much for your time and your expertise. And I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. So thanks, everybody.